And I'm now thrilled to introduce our moderator, Emma Jabor, your colleague at the Ford School, our student at Ross, and our esteemed speaker, Mr. Chasten Buttigieg. Emma is a dual MPP MBA student at the Ford School of Public Policy, a Bonnet Fellow, and one of the winners of the 2022 Ross Leadership Crisis Challenge. This past summer, she worked as an MBA summer consultant at EY Parthenon. Most recently, she returned to her position as policy advisor in the Mayor of Detroit's office, where she focuses on economic transformation projects alongside her studies. We are so grateful for her leadership in making this event happen. And our keynote speaker today is Mr. Chasten Buttigieg, an educator, arts enthusiast, LGBTQ plus rights advocate, and husband of the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Chasten published his first book in 2020, I Have Something to Tell You, from which I read, in which he recounts his journey to finding acceptance as a gay man. And you will also hear more about the young adult edition of that very same book here today. Please join me in welcoming Emma and Chasten to the stage.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. You're so welcome.
Hello. All right. Good morning. Hi, Emma.
Thank you for being here today.
Nice to be here.
Okay, how are you
Happy
doing?
Friday. Is it Friday?
It's Friday.
Okay.
Yes.
Whew.
Thank you for being here. I kind of want to start off by setting the scene with who we have in the audience today. So we have a lot of duals in the house, which means we're bringing in our friends from both schools. So what I would say about the two groups is we have our public policy students who are really familiar with wrestling and grappling with a lot of the hard questions. I think policy kids are always pushing for more, like assessing what we have now against a world we haven't built yet, because they're just ready to push and push and push. And then we also have our MBA colleagues who are very familiar with a lot of the discussions that happen around DE&I and are, like, at this point, incredibly familiar with how we conduct these conversations, but also maybe a little less comfortable in, like, grappling with the political space or the legislative implications of these conversations. And so I hope that...
And we will solve all of that
we
today.
will.
In this next hour.
So I hope we can ask, I think, of the Ford students who are often a little bit frustrated and pumped up, like, where we can find the moments of joy and where we can take a lot of pride. And then for the Ross folks, let's discuss, like, why this is so important for business leaders of the future to understand their role as allies.
Great.
So with that, first I do want to talk about your book. It came out in 2020.
Yeah.
And so what first drove you to write about your life and your experiences, and 3 years later, how are you relating to the book now?
Yeah, a lot has changed in life in general, but even over the last couple of years. When I was approached about the idea to write the book, I laughed at it. What was I, 30, 31?
A child.
And a child, yeah. I still feel like a child. And I was like, well, I could write some essays. I would maybe write some essays, but I can't write a memoir. I'm 31. And I had to sort of humble myself before the idea. I was very, very grateful for the idea. But I had to realize that it wasn't about me. It was about what the book could do, what the book could do for other people, and why telling that story was so important. And I never really believed that it would be me telling those stories. The same way on the presidential campaign, I never thought that one day that scared kid who grew up in northern Michigan and ran away from home when he came out would be the one flying across the country, supporting his husband, running for president, telling these really vulnerable stories about coming out and identity and allyship and coalition building. I never thought that that would be me. Same way, I didn't think that it could be me to write the book. The first book had to be a lot of things. I was consistently told this is a political book, it's a political memoir, it's your face and your name, and that's it. So if you've read it or you've seen it, I'm not the biggest fan of the cover, it still makes me very uncomfortable today. But that it's your face and your name, and it's like you are a political person. And I don't like to consider myself a political person. I call myself politically adjacent. By virtue of, I guess, who I'm married to and what I do with my life. And some of you might roll your eyes at that. But then I focused on the YA book this year. Well, it came out this year. I started writing it 2 years ago because I really wanted to talk about identity, growing up in a space, in a time when you're not sure if this country is ready for you yet. When you've been told terrible things about your identity and yourself and your dignity and your humanity. And I wanted to slow down and expand those stories of youth and learning to love myself, learning to forgive people in my life, and really write the book I just wish I would have had when I was 12 years old. Really coming to terms with who I was at a time in a place that wasn't ready for me yet. And so that has sort of been the basis of my work and what I've been doing the last couple of years with that book and public speaking, trying to help folks understand the importance of allyship and what they can do. So again, I'm sure that with the remaining time that we have, we will solve all of those problems today.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
I think when I have seen you operating in the public space, a lot of people are drawn to you for your authenticity. I have watched a lot of 40 to 50-year-old Midwestern women line up
the moms,
to be
yeah.
to be in your presence.
And listen, I'm grateful for my constituents. Okay.
But getting back to that authenticity, I think that the folks in the room and people who are watching, we are at a point where we're choosing our future careers, and what we crave in our everyday life is authenticity and the opportunity to bring our full selves.
Yeah.
And sure, there's like the personal reason for that, but on a macro scale, like places run better when people are at home in themselves, when they're showing up to things. So
true. Yeah.
How have you navigated finding like the most comfortable, safest level of authenticity as you navigate your work in the public space? And what do you have to speak on that for us?
If I was like my truest, most authentic self here, we wouldn't get any work done. I am a theater kid at heart. So, but there was a time on the campaign trail when the campaign really took off like a rocket ship. And things were changing very rapidly. The staff was growing rapidly. More people were coming in, and that means when more people are coming in, more opinions are coming into the room. And not just from staff, but from the world. As my social media accounts blew up, everybody came out of the woodwork. Everyone had a piece of advice for me. As Pete's star seemed to, jettison one way, I was told by too many people to go home, that the best thing that I could do to support my husband would be to hide, to go back to Indiana, to support him from the sidelines. And multiple people would say, just let him win, and then you'll be first husband or whatever. And that was crushing, to be told by some people that you loved or trusted, that you should hide who you are, suppress who you are, in a way that I felt like I had done for almost 18 years of my life, when I spent in the closet. And I couldn't do that. That didn't work for me. And of course, when I told that to Peter, that didn't work for him either. But there was a time when I felt like I had to be somebody else, to be a professional or a political spouse, or this, again, 30-something with cameras and eyes and national attention on you, and there's no playbook. It's not like Michelle Obama and I were getting tea every Sunday. So I was very confused about who to be, and there was a kind of a breaking point for me. I had to go home and slow down and surround myself with really good friends. And I made a decision, said, I am just going to be myself. And if people don't like that, then at least they don't like me. Not some version of me that I have concocted that I think will be palatable, for 52% of the country. So I started opening up about my stump speech totally changed. I stopped talking about the policy of the campaign so much because I am not a policy person. I like to stay in my lane. And I felt like I couldn't speak extremely authentically about those policies. But I did talk about the policies that impact me and my family. I talked about growing up in Northern Michigan. I talked about being the product of two working class parents. I talked about coming out. I talked about that journey to self-acceptance and talked about belonging and community. And I opened up about so many different things. My experience with sexual assault, my experience with medical debt, with student debt. And I found that I had created more of a deeper connection with people on the campaign trail when I started talking about those things that I felt I had to hide because those were shameful, right? We're not supposed to talk about our failures. Those are unique products of American society. Many people have medical debt. Many students have student debt. Many people struggle with their identity or coming out or feeling like they truly belong in America. And so that was easier for me up to a point. Then you start feeling vulnerability fatigue, where you give everything all day, every day, and then you're not filling your cup. So there's a balance to be found. But I have always found that in my work, I feel like I'm more successful being more authentically me, because then I can focus on the task at hand rather than pretending to be somebody else. Of course, that's easier said than done. But as the dean mentioned, sort of one of the things that was really powerful for me on the trail was meeting people who they don't need to talk about policy, they didn't need to talk about a presidential campaign, they just needed to be affirmed and they needed to be seen. And I could be that person to just convene a roundtable of young student advocates, gun safety advocates, or young LGBTQ people to sit down at a table with young trans youth and just listen, just provide the space. I didn't have to talk, but it was that moment that somebody from a presidential campaign cared enough to sit down and listen. And some of those lessons have followed me throughout my life, whether I was teaching or whether I was on the campaign trail. But I find that you bring so much more of yourself. When you bring so much more of yourself, I think the work is more authentic, the connections are deeper and more meaningful.
Absolutely. So pivoting that back to this crowd where we have new leaders who are going to be working in government, in nonprofit organizations, and some pretty enormous companies that make a lot of decisions. How do we become leaders who create space for authenticity? How do we draw that out of people and make it possible for people to bring at least as much of themselves as they want to into work every day?
Yeah, that's a whole other TED Talk, right? Or maybe an entire semester here. But making sure that you are in a space that values those conversations in the first place is so important. So you might take stock or inventory of the environment or the culture, the atmosphere of a place that you're interested in working in, before you get there and get really upset when you learn that they don't really care about DEI. I think that's a waste of time and resources. You certainly want to land somewhere where you feel like you can make an impact and a change, but you might not necessarily want to land somewhere where you know that that change is unwelcomed or your voice is not wanted. And then continuing to have conversations like this. This is really incredible. This is your first out week. That's fantastic.
This is our first marquee event like this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, totally honored. Does it come with a tassel or anything? Being part of these conversations is so important because, I hope you take away something today, but you also can look around this room and realize that this is your community. These are the people focusing on the same problems that you are, or they might care about some of the same issues that you care about. And we certainly can't solve all of them when we are completely isolated and alone, but recognizing the value of those conversations. And I think part of allyship right now is also recognizing when you don't need to be part of the conversation, you need to be part of the listening and part of the learning. Specifically with what's going on with trans youth in this country. I think that is an example of how, one, disinformation spreads so rapidly. And then you also have other people, even in our own acronym, who don't quite understand the lived experience of trans people or what trans people might be navigating, either in education or healthcare or housing. And so sometimes it's important to be part of the conversation, but sometimes it's important to recognize I have work to do there. I have some learning or unlearning to do there. And if you are working in a space or studying in a space that values that type of work, then that benefits everyone, right? You mentioned you're getting ready to go out into the world and work at some of these companies or work in policy, and you will need to recognize when it's time to step forward and maybe when it's time to sit down.
That actually segues really nicely into something that we had an amazing speaker yesterday, Andrea James, who's actually luckily in the audience today, but Andrea is a trans activist, writer, producer, and yesterday one of the things that I took away from her talk was she talked about queerness in society and how first it's a sin, and then it's a crime, and then it's a disease, and then it's a joke, and then it's a trait. And right now, I know, I thought about it all night. And so right now we have what you were just talking about, how trans teens and trans men and women are on a different part of that life cycle than gay and lesbian men and women respectively. And then it's also really folded into place. And depending on where you live and your socioeconomic background and racial background, religious, all of it, where you are able to live your life on that life cycle is very different.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how you bring together such a sprawling community who go day to day on a different part of the cycle, how we then funnel all of that into one collective voice for change, and or how, instead of focusing on the collective, how you as an individual know, like, this is where I'm at on the life cycle, and what am I, like, how do I challenge myself to make sure I'm paying attention to the rest of the...
I suppose we also have to recognize that just because maybe we've progressed from one of those stages to the next doesn't mean that some of the trauma or beliefs that people had about ourselves or that we had about ourselves have gone away. That's such an... Wow, what a profound statement. I think our community, specifically the LGBTQ community, has to recognize that just because we are all part of the same acronym doesn't mean we all have the same experience. Yes, I'm gay, but I'm also white, and I'm also a cisgender man, and I also walk through the world with different privileges that other people don't have or that can't fall back on. If I feel really intimidated, I can butch up my voice a little bit. I rented a Jeep at the airport today, so I have opportunities to... It's not like I'm afraid of driving. I don't know why I said that. Emma saw me in the parking lot. I was like, yeah, I'm driving a Jeep today.
It also has like I don't know, it has a trunk. It has a, yeah.
Oh yeah, the Gladiator?
Yes.
I'm sure my dad will be happy that that's the car I chose. But anyway, some of us have safety nets that we can fall back on. And we can laugh about that, but it's true. Like when I'm sitting on an airplane and the person next to me starts small talking, and you know that 4 or 5 questions later, they're going to get to, what does your wife do? Because they might see this ring on my finger. I have a choice to make, right? So we don't come out once. We come out sometimes multiple times a day. Do I want to say, well, my husband? And then I don't know if this person is, an ally or not, and I certainly don't want to be uncomfortable for the next 4 hours. But there are ways in which I can say, our family's in DC, and we split our time between here and Michigan, and you can just open your book and continue. Whereas some people don't have the privilege to fall back on those things. Or they might not navigate the world with other privileges that you have, like safety nets, right? When I ran away from home, I slept in my car for a while, but then I also had friends that I could sleep on their couches or on their blow-up mattresses. And I had a job, right? There are multiple variations of your privilege. And we have to recognize that just because you are one of those letters in the acronym doesn't mean that you have the same experience as everybody. And I ultimately believe that society, or like our acronym, I should say, is going to be 25 letters long. It is everything but S. If you are not straight, then you will be jumbled into the other category. And I don't believe that, once the opposition or the other side feels like they have successfully demolished the T in the acronym, that they'll stop there. So that means it's our responsibility to recognize that this moment might mean that our allyship is needed much more than ever. Specifically with the trans community, one of the things I would love for you to consider is writing down the questions that you have. Maybe you have a bunch of questions floating around in the back of your head that you might still harbor, ideas that you harbor or prejudice that you might recognize that you harbor, and write them down and then go start researching the answers to those questions. Don't wait for a trans person to be presented to you to solve all of those problems for you. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity, especially in DC, to sit down with trans organizations or activists and grab a cup of coffee and get my questions answered, because I go on television all the time and I want to fight disinformation with information, real information. And I think we have to recognize in the community that it is not on the shoulders of our trans brothers and sisters to solve those problems for themselves. It's up to us, especially if you're a white gay man walking through the world with an enormous amount of privilege. I can make choices about what I talk about and what I don't talk about. It shouldn't be on the shoulders of an already extremely marginalized community to solve those issues. Fighting some of that disinformation is really important. Like when we recognize that about 1 to maybe 5% of the American population identify as trans. More Americans have worked at a McDonald's than identify as trans. It's really important to fight some of that disinformation with reality, and then talk about what you know, what is real. I don't know where you're all from, but I feel like up in northern Michigan, sometimes it's at the coffee shop, sometimes it's at Meijer. You might hear something that is unkind or untrue, and you have to recognize that it's you. You're the person that gets to call it out. You're the person that can start that change. And know that people are more likely to vote for a candidate or a position that you support. You probably already know this because you're in the Ford School, but they're more likely to support something or a person that you believe in if somebody that they know and trust tells them to, rather than an ad or a commercial or a mailer. And so having these conversations within our own friend groups, within our own families and our communities is really important right now.
That kind of leads me to focus on the policy for a second.
Sure.
So right now, the ACLU is tracking nearly 500 anti-LGBTQ bills across the U.S. 35% of trans teens live in states where gender-affirming care is banned.
Yeah.
We just went back to school a month ago. You are a teacher. We have 35 new laws on the books that teachers are navigating around LGBTQ issues. So, like, taking a step back, and it's like we know this is all going on. There is a reason that we have affinity groups. There's a reason we have Out Week. There's a reason that companies come here and they really try to have a space for LGBTQ recruits and students. But like zooming out, what is going on like collectively? Why are we seeing like this I know it's common to see the pendulum swing in the other direction as soon as we've seen progress. So what's operating at a higher level right now?
Yeah, I think two things. So one, the other side of the aisle has acknowledged that, and I know that you say this is not a political space. Everyone knows I'm a Democrat, so I'm just going to get that out of the way. the other side of the aisle has acknowledged that they threw everything at the wall. And what sticks is attacking LGBTQ people again, most specifically trans youth. So this is intentional. And for some of these people, for a while, I would believe that I don't think they actually believe some of the things that they're saying. They just know that this is how they get their campaign contributions and how they curry favor with the Trump base. And now I'm getting to the point where, yeah. Oh, no. I mean, I think that this is actually what they believe. I lost my train of thought. That's okay. Two things. So there's that, right? They acknowledge like, oh, we need something to focus on. We need an enemy. It's LGBTQ people again. It's also important to note that the majority of Americans support LGBTQ equality, which was not true even when we were kids. Even when I was growing up in Northern Michigan, public opinion about LGBTQ people was predominantly negative. Now it is predominantly positive, supportive. But that is not reflected in the halls of Congress, or even in some state houses, or even on some school boards. So there's a big disconnect there between what American people actually support and what politicians are doing for attention, for clicks, and for donations, and for power. Another TED Talk for your school, I'm sure. And where do we go from there, right? I think it's, of course, disheartening when you see your humanity up for debate every day. But we also have to recognize that we're probably going to lose a lot of battles. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't be in them. When some of these state houses are so gerrymandered, they don't represent the opinions and the will of the people, it doesn't mean we still shouldn't protest. It doesn't mean we shouldn't vote. It doesn't mean we shouldn't support a candidate who runs on a pro-equality platform. It just means that until some things about democracy fundamentally change, that we will lose some battles. But that doesn't mean that we should just go home, because your constituents are watching. Young people are watching. I think about what it would have been like for me, in the early 90s, had I had social media, what that would have done to my mental health as an already closeted, terrified teenager, thinking, well, I wasn't a teenager in the early 90s. I'm not going to date myself that far back. But you have young people who are spending time on the internet who see a world debating their humanity. We have to show them that people care. We have to show them that there's nothing wrong with them. We have to fight disinformation with real information. We have to support candidates in races up and down the ballot, even if we know they'll lose. Because if they lose 60-40 versus 80-20, that makes a world of a difference. Just because it feels like we're not going to knock the wall down doesn't mean we shouldn't pick up the hammer, right? So I know there's a lot going on right now. But part of me also wants to believe that they're going to lose terribly. And hopefully that they realize that attacking LGBTQ people and attacking young people, attacking families, attacking librarians, books, teachers is not a winning platform. So I hope they lose miserably. And I also hope that their party is able to come to their senses and realize that the majority of American people want you to focus on things like plowing the streets and picking up the trash and making their lives better, safer, and easier. Something that gives me a lot of hope is young people. I've been in over 40 cities, I think, this year on this book tour, and I get an opportunity to meet with young people, high schoolers, who are spending their weekends protesting at state capitals. There's this great organization in Iowa called Iowa WTF, which stands for exactly what you think it does. And they're young people who have created this online GSA, especially for kids in rural Iowa who don't have a GSA, who might not have role models. And so every time I meet with young people, I see organizations like that, I'm reminded that young people are ready to burn it down. And young people are so ready to see things change. I find great inspiration in that. And I'm happy to be part of that fight because, again, we can't just go home and give up because a very, very loud and vocal minority has the microphone right now.
Great. I was going to ask you about what's making you hopeful, but you went there anyway.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
with
that
that
and my kids, I guess.
I was going to say, I want to pivot to the most joyful topic of all, which is that you are a parent
Yeah.
and you have two beautiful toddlers. And I want to ask you how this has changed for you after becoming a parent, and how you're viewing yourself navigating this, not just as Chasten, the individual, but Chasten, the dad.
Kids change everything. I don't know if there are any other parents in the audience, but kids really, they change so much for me. I was a teacher. My job on the safety committee, which is a thing we had to have in the United States of America, was after I sent my kids to math in the morning, I would walk the perimeter of the school and check every door and see if they were locked. And then it was my job to write up teachers who didn't have their doors locked. I thought I fully understood the weight of school shootings. As a teacher, my classroom had windows on two sides, ton of windows, and it was just kind of this acknowledgement that if something bad were going to happen, I did not stand a chance. And when I would run lockdown drills with my students, they would just joke. We would walk out into the parking lot and they would joke about going to Starbucks or Panera, because we have just completely desensitized an entire generation of young people that it's a reality in the United States of America that if you go to school, you might die. I thought I understood the magnitude of that, and then I became a dad. And then I handed my kid to their teacher in daycare one day. And now I think about that in a completely different way. Being a dad is magnificent and beautiful and challenging, and it is everything. They've shown me so much about how beautiful and fragile life is. When they were born premature. Gus spent some time on a ventilator. A couple months after we finally got them home, I went into the hospital with a cancer scare, underwent major surgery, and couldn't pick them up for a couple months. And it just felt like life hit me like a freight train, the fragility of life, how special and unique it is. And it has really shaped how I view policy and how I view activism and the urgency of meeting this moment. And I don't think I really truly felt the weight of that until I became a dad. And so I could sit here and bore you with all the cute stories about, if you ever start a parent talking about their kids, like, you're going to be here all day. So I will try to stay really focused on policy, because they are incredible and challenging and silly. But they have reminded me what matters. I used to be a very online person too. I would walk to Trader Joe's on my phone, and scroll through Twitter. And now I take my kids to Trader Joe's and we point out fire trucks and buses and all the beautiful things in the world. But they remind me what's right in front of us, what's super important. And one of the terrifying things of being a parent is realizing that we're racing towards the day when I will no longer be here. And I only have a short amount of time to get it right, and to hopefully change the world in a way that benefits them. And so that's kind of what, one, keeps me up at night, but it also keeps me really motivated to stay in the work. Yeah.
So we're about to open it up to the audience for questions, but I also know that audiences need a minute to process what they want to ask. So while everyone thinks about things you might want to ask Chasten, I'm going to ask 3 fun questions, because we have been engaging with some hard topics. So my first question is what your favorite current item from Costco is.
Costco?
Costco.
I love Costco. They're one of the only places that has double strollers, so I can take the twins to Costco.
I did not know that.
Yeah, they love Costco. Yeah, I love that you can get like 400 croissants for $2. And I just need one. My mom used to do this with me when she would take me to Meijer when I was a little kid. She'd put me in the cart and we'd go right to the bakery and she'd let me pick one treat. And now at like Costco, you're like, here's 10 croissants. Don't yell. Oh man. Do I have a favorite item from Costco? Oh, the Aussie Bites are pretty cool.
Those are good.
Anyone shop at Costco? Is this a relevant question? Okay.
They're thinking,
yeah.
okay.
We go through a lot of eggs and milk in our house, so.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right. one more minute for you guys to get some thoughts together. What concert would be your Barbie Oppenheimer mashup?
Oh man,
Two artists.
Oh, so they don't have to be like sort of competing in
No,
theme.
it's fine. Just...
Well, I just saw Brandy Carlisle and Pink. That was an incredible mashup.
Which one is Barbie and which one is Oppenheimer?
Yeah, that's right. This is a complex question
Yeah.
because I feel like those movies have opposing feels and themes. But that was an incredible concert. Maybe like this is dumb. I hate superlative things, and I'm really bad on the spot like this. Like a Shania Twain and Mumford and Sons.
Okay. Dark folk.
I'm gonna keep thinking about this like my entire drive to Traverse City. I'm gonna think about this today.
Okay, I think that's enough time though. So, okay, Cameron and Annika are gonna walk around. We do have a few minutes for questions from the audience. Looks like we already have one up front.
Hi, Chasten. Such a pleasure to meet you. And I want to ask you, so what are the challenges that you and Pete met during the 2020 camping trail that you think as a gay man, and how did you guys solve it?
I mean, there were a lot of challenges. Running for president is pretty hard. Personally, I think the challenge was how to remain yourself. How do you stay true to yourself? Especially as a spouse. The goal of the campaign, their job, is to launch that rocket as far as it can go. And it felt like he had a team of 500 people by the end of the campaign around him, pushing him. And their job is to fill every minute of his time, get him on every program possible. They're all competing for his time. And my job was to keep the rocket tethered to the ground. And therefore, I felt like I sort of had 500 enemies on the campaign, because if there was a free moment, I would say, can we get coffee? Can he take a break? Can he maybe have like half a night off so we can get dinner? He looks really tired. He needs to see a doctor, and it felt like there was this whole apparatus around him competing with what I wanted to do as the spouse and the person looking out for his well-being. That was a challenge. And then in that challenge, just being yourself, because you will be surrounded by opinions, either in your own team or on social media that tell you to be somebody else. And I have seen in presidential politics and in our current politics how it can just swallow people up to the point where you might not even recognize who you are anymore. I'm terrified of that, to be honest. When I was just talking to someone the other day, and I was like, every time I go to the White House, I was like, that is not a normal sentence. I see how that world and that apparatus can just swallow people up, where you lose sight of what truly matters. It's why I love coming home. I like being in Michigan. I like talking to my farmer across the street. I like being around my family. I like doing things that feel real. So much about DC just doesn't feel real. And that's one of the biggest challenges in politics. And on the campaign is just be true to yourself and hold on to that. Because if you lose it, then I really feel like you've got nothing left.
Thank you.
You got it. This is the quietest, most respectful room I've ever been in.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Caroline. I'm a dual degree student with Ford School and School for the Environment.
Cool.
And I don't think I've ever heard anyone use the phrase vulnerability fatigue, but it resonated with me. And I was wondering if you could say more about how you do find that balance of being authentic, being vulnerable in a way that inspires others, but at the same time, filling your cup, managing your self-care.
Yeah.
Like, how do you find where that line is, and
Yeah.
how do you manage that balance?
It's really hard. It's really, really hard. And it became easier when I felt like it was okay to talk about not being okay. Like the first time I heard that phrase was really impactful for me. I feel like that, especially that early experience in the campaign, and now I always thought I would just go back to teaching. You just go back to your life before. I didn't realize that life was just going to be public. And that came with a lot of changes. And I really appreciate opportunities like this. I love talking with people. I'm an extrovert. I like talking about things I know or believe in or love. But that comes with a cost, especially when sometimes the conversation, I did this event in Houston the other day, and the first question they were like, so when you ran away from home, you were unhoused. Talk about that. And it's like, we're going to start with the trauma and go from there. You're talking about your trauma, and you're talking about all these really hard things. And yeah, you give and you give and you give, and at the end of the day, you just feel so empty. And so recognizing that it was okay to take a break, it was okay to sit in that discomfort, it was okay to ask for help. I'm really grateful for therapy. I think everyone could benefit from therapy. Everyone should be in therapy if you can and if you have access to it. And I really appreciate that there are more people in public life talking about their experience in therapy and mental health, because I think many people in public life could use therapy. And it's not bad. There's nothing bad about therapy. I love therapy. I love going to therapy and being like, there's this death threat, there's these mean comments on Twitter, I feel like I'm not doing a very good job, as an ally, and I can sit with someone and talk about just those emotions, right? That's so important. And recognizing when I think I've tapped out is really important. Because I used to say yes to a lot of things. And there's this concept of forecasting your time value in the future. You're familiar with that? So your time, we're more likely to give away our time if it's in the future, and we don't value our time as much if it's not right in front of us. And so I would say, oh yeah, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. And then they come, and you're like, I have nothing more to give, So really recognizing when it's time to stop and when it's time to ask for help. And surrounding yourself with really good people who love you for you, and they don't need you to be author or, activist or whatever. They just want you to be okay, is really, really important. I find that I'm a worse public speaker, a worse ally, and a worse dad if I'm really tired and I haven't taken care of myself. So taking care of yourself is work. I think we have this idea that if you stop and you say, I'm not going to study today, or I'm not going to go to a talk today, or, I can't do another Zoom panel today, that is also work. Filling your cup is work, so that you can go out and continue to do the other work. Squeaky chairs.
Hi, my name is Vanessa. I'm a PhD student in accounting. And I was wondering, other than your own book, of course, if you have a favorite book maybe that you've read recently or of all time that you would recommend.
Oh my gosh. So I've sort of switched to audiobooks because I spend a lot of time in the car driving between DC and Traverse City. And I'm a huge fan of R. Eric Thomas, if you've ever heard of him. He writes essays. He used to do like a lot of Moth story hours, and then he wrote these books that are just really funny essays. And that's kind of like something I do to fill my cup, is I feel this pressure to like read more Jill Lepore and I like know more about American history. And sometimes I just want to listen to a really funny story. And so I'm a big fan of R. Eric. He just had a new book come out called Congratulations, the Best is Over. And it's very funny. So check that one out. It's great on audiobook because he reads it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I certainly don't have any recommendations in the accounting department.
Hi, I'm Haley.
Hi.
I'm president of the Emma Jabor fan club. If we're recruiting, if anybody wants to join. Okay, so what you said about like the real harm of seeing your humanity up for debate in public discourse really struck me, and that's something that really motivates me to fight for justice, etc. And then on the flip side, I think about the like humanity and the experiences and the pain and the misinformation that all the people who are like fighting for anti-trans work also bring to the table. And I think I get really tripped up on like how you how you operationalize both humanity and accountability. And I'm just kind of thinking like, what does it look like for me to defend the humanity of marginalized communities, of people I love, of myself, et cetera, and also like hold the humanity of the opposition and like meet them there.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes on the campaign trail I would meet people who I could tell who they weren't quite there on LGBTQ equality. Like they had stumbled upon my husband and they liked that he was very nerdy and wonky, and you know, they would talk about how he was a veteran, yada yada yada. And I could tell that they just weren't quite comfortable with the fact that he had a husband and not a wife. So I try to find common ground there. One of the things that I have always tucked away in the back of my head as I do my advocacy work is that I want to be the person that doesn't beat people over the head with a 2x4. I want to lay the 2x4 down and build the bridge. And it's really hard. Because sometimes you really want to beat people over the head with a 2x4. And building the bridge takes work and time, and it's exhausting. And sometimes you don't want to be the person defending the dignity of your marriage or your existence to somebody else. So I try to find common ground. I try to find ways to talk about things that I know we both care about. I've had this conversation, especially around trans youth in northern Michigan with some neighbors, where we talk about what we do, what we both believe in. You believe in protecting kids. You believe that every kid should have access to education, yes. You believe in keeping kids safe. Yes, let's find some common ground to start laying those 2x4s on top of. But recognize that that work will be exhausting. And sometimes you will want to roll your eyes so dramatically that they'll get stuck in the back of your brain because some of the things that you hear will make you want to run the other way. But like we talked about earlier, you also might have to recognize that you might be the only person to ever lay that board down and build the bridge with that person. Whether it's in your family, your community, your neighbor, you might be the only person that ever presents them with the other side. You might be the only person that they have ever talked to that offers them a different viewpoint. And some days it will surprise you because you're just going to get the mail or you're picking up some groceries. At least this happens with me. I guess I'm a very public person, and sometimes people surprise me in the checkout line at the grocery store, where you realize like, oh, I don't have my materials. I'm not ready to do my TED Talk about LGBTQ equality right now, but you might be that person. That might be the moment. I try to recognize that humanity in people all the time, because if you can't see somebody else as a human being, what are we doing, right? I think that's what gets lost in, or that's one of the problems, especially in the anti-LGBTQ, anti-trans rhetoric. Some of these people don't even see trans Americans as human beings. They're just talking points. Points to be scored, points to be won. They're campaign dollars, they're donations. We have to find a way to allow other people to at least first see the humanity in another American, another human being. Good luck.
Hi, I'm Jaya. It's lovely to meet you. Thank you for coming here today. I think we've been talking a lot about, quite rightfully, just the stresses and everything that is facing the LGBTQ plus community. Yeah. I'm curious if you have any stories of hope, though, or just things that you've witnessed that you're like, oh, well, things seem to be turning around. This seems optimistic. So anything you can share on that? Yeah, we live in a system that rewards dumpster fires. I mean, how many hundreds of members of Congress are there? And we only hear about a handful of them because they're the ones who are banging the pots and the pans and dumping gasoline on the dumpster fire that is the House of Representatives right now, right? But I have met so many people in DC who are fantastic people. You will never hear about them because they're just there doing their job. And they put their head down, they do the work, they care about their constituents, they're not on, the news every night, they're not saying something ridiculous in a hearing so that they can cut it and put it on the internet or put in an email to raise a bunch of money off of it. They're just doing their job. And that's more about our media ecosystem and the reward system that's in place for sound bites. And it really
again, I'm not a politician. It really pisses me off. I get so worked up sometimes in DC because it reminds me of the worst days of high school. It really does. And these people don't realize that it's not high school. It's the United States House of Representatives. This is it. This is real. It's the big times. What you do actually affects other people's lives. So I won't get on my soapbox for too long about that because I'll get too worked up. There are really, really good people in this world who are doing their jobs, who care about the things that they should be focusing on right now, especially when it comes to allyship, but you might never hear about them because that's not a sexy news item. As I've been traveling the country with this book tour, I was talking to the dean a little bit earlier about how I keep meeting parents who come to the book tour because they don't know what to do. Because for 20, 30 years, they believed one thing, and then their kid came out. And there are people making the right little steps every day. I love meeting them. I love talking with them because they're putting the love of a child over the opinions of other people, or the opinions of maybe their church community, or their neighbors, or their friends and family, because they want to keep their kid alive. And not every kid gets that, but you might never hear about them. That student organization I was talking about in Iowa, these are juniors, seniors in high school who should be enjoying youth, who should be, I don't know, on a bowling league or something, just like enjoying being a kid. And rather than that, they're spending their evenings on Zoom checking in on kids out in rural Iowa, making sure that they're alive. I meet so many inspiring people across the country who you might never hear about because that's just not how our reward system is structured. But they're doing the right thing, and they're focused on the right thing. And when I see that paired with public opinion, this country is already there in some ways and wants to get there in many ways. And then you look at that dumpster fire, and sometimes it feels like you need to meet a million kind people to outweigh the one member of Congress on Twitter who's abandoned the idea of public service in exchange for power and attention. You have to find the good and look for the good. And when I'm in DC, I just try to surround myself with more of the good. And when the conversation inevitably comes around to the bad, I like to say this is a downward spiral conversation, and we're going nowhere from here, right? Because if we all spend our time talking about those certain members of Congress, then we might not talk about other things that we really care about. So look for that and hold on to that. And I think hopefully you will take a moment and introduce yourself to some of the people in this room, if you don't know a lot of the people in this room as well. I like to remind folks that I only fly in and out, and this is your community. And so if you're kind of feeling fatigued a little bit and you're wondering, how do we go forward from here? Or you're disheartened by some of the things that you're seeing in the news, these are the people you want to surround yourself with, who are going to remind you why you're in this work in the first place.
Yeah, I love that question too, because I've been reflecting on this a lot at the Ford School, where it almost feels like somehow like acknowledging that this year, I think the last couple of years, we have seen some amazing progress take place, and some amazing policies have been adopted related to poverty and related to like just funding for things that never would have been funded before. And it also still kind of feels like, okay, nobody say anything. Yeah. Nobody acknowledge that the good stuff is also happening, but it's important to come back to it. So
I would say let it be the gas in your tank.
Yeah.
Don't let it be the thing that deters you, because we really need you. We really, really need you.
Hi, Chasten.
Hi.
I'm Javi. I'm a dual degree at the policy school and at the law school.
Great.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned, and I think throughout, you've mentioned sort of figuring out your role in the campaign.
Yeah.
And also sort of your place in politics and not being a politician.
Yeah.
I'm guessing during that time you also had to sort of figure out the role that you would have occupied in that administration, right, in the presidency. What do you think would have been your role as first husband, as the first husband?
Yeah, I try not to think about that. That was a very terrifying idea to me, actually, in the campaign. So I talked a lot on the campaign trail about arts and education. A big advocate for the arts. I believe that the arts are actually a way that we can save democracy, because the arts ask us to be empathetic, creative, compassionate. They ask us to think about our place in the world. So I talked a lot about how I wish more kids had access to arts and education. I'm a product of art education. I was a big theater kid. That's what I wrote my master's thesis on. So fervent supporter of public education, arts and education, and mental health. Those were kind of the three things that I just kept talking about. And, you know, even though I'm not there, I still talk about them every day. And so in a way, I'm very grateful that that platform has continued and I get to talk about things that I'm really passionate about. So I was never trying to measure the curtains because that seemed very scary to me, actually. But I'm glad that I can continue talking about things that I hope every American gets access to, and things I fundamentally believe in and support. I try to stay in my lane. That's why I don't go on MSNBC as much as they ask me to, because I don't want to be a political, analyst. I'm a dad and an author and an advocate. I don't want to be a pundit. So, yeah.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Maddie. Nice to meet you, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
I'm a dual as well in the School for Environment and Ross, and I'm also a strong ally of this community, and do my best to support this community while I'm here and outside of school, of course. I'm curious, from your personal experience, if you can share with those of us who are allies in this room, how we can better show up for our friends in this community, especially during this turbulent time, around things that we may not fully understand and are working to learn, and just want to support our friends and help them.
Yeah. I think this moment in allyship is really important, where we all stop and ask ourselves, when it comes to the term ally, have I given it to myself or have I earned it? And I know a lot of well-intentioned people, well-meaning, I love everybody, yay gays. If you ask them, how are you personally working toward a better and brighter and safer future for LGBTQ people, they might not have some concrete evidence. And it's really important that we ask our allies right now to think about ways in which they can use their time or their money or their privilege to benefit other people. You can use your time in a multitude of ways. That can either be volunteering or spending time, like we talked about earlier, unlearning some things or learning about some things. You have questions about the LGBTQ community, write them down and then go seek out the answers to them. Money. Some of you are going to work at some places with a lot of money, and you need to, one, get comfortable asking people to put the money where the mouth is, right? And recognize that money can go a long way for some organizations. Like our Pride organization in Traverse City, Up North Pride, reached out to me this year because they were struggling to get some sponsorships because local businesses were pulling out because of everything that's going on. That's not allyship. That's not allyship if you pull out when it gets really uncomfortable. That's just participating in capitalism, right? That's rainbow washing. To say that you're an ally when it's easy and then run away when it gets scary, especially in a place like Northern Michigan. So recognize that you might be the person to raise that as well. Because as a gay family living in Northern Michigan, if I see your sponsorship on Up North Pride, I'm going to have a really positive reflection of your company because I know that you're an affirming company. So your time, your money, and your privilege. Like we talked about earlier, recognizing that you might be the only person to have some of those conversations. One of the best things that you can a few of the things that you could do. I think I'm so grateful to have some really good friends in my life. And when we all get together, we're larger than life. We're like theater kids. It's just too loud. Like that's why Pete, I think, leaves the room when we're all together. And we're all characters, right? And I'm in front of the camera or on a stage all the time. And having a friend say, I see you in front of the camera or on the stage or holding the microphone being okay, but I want to let you know that it is okay not to be okay. And I want to let you know that with everything you're battling or everything you're going through, I'm here for you and I love you. Having a person say that to you can mean so much, especially when you feel like you're battling it alone or you have to be super strong for everybody all the time. Send an email, send a text. It really does go a very long way. And then find other ways, if there are allies in the room, find other ways to just signal to people that you're an ally. Sometimes that's a sticker on a water bottle or a laptop, because there might be somebody sitting in class next to you who's not exactly sure who you are or if they convey their truest self. And if they saw a little sticker on your backpack or your laptop, that actually might be a huge sigh of relief for them, that they don't even have to worry about being their truest self next to some stranger in class. So many different ways we can think about it right now.
I think action items is an amazing place to close it
Great.
out. Chasten, thank you so much
Thanks for
coming
having
and
me.
joining us today. I know that this entire week everyone has been kind of buzzing around waiting for you to come. So thank you
thank you
for joining us and for bringing your full self.
This has been a fantastic first visit to Ann Arbor. I feel like this is my first proper visit to University of Michigan. So thank you very much for the warm welcome. Thank you for engaging in this work in the first place. And thank you going forward for all of the tremendous work that you're going to do. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks. Thank you. And can I just ask for one more round of applause for Emma for organizing this? Thank you very much. Emma, thank you for the invitation. Appreciate it. All right. Oh, I'm literally just dragging. See? We can embarrass ourselves.